War. War never changes. Since the dawn of humankind, when our ancestors first discovered the killing power of rock and bone, blood has been spilled in the name of everything from God to justice to simple psychotic rage. In the year 2077, after millennia of armed conflict, the destructive nature of man could sustain itself no longer.
Yeah, so war. War's kind of cool. I mean, not to actually be in, but to watch it on TV or to experience tamer parts of it through gaming, all from the safety of your couch. Seriously, I mean, dirt, mud, guns, bombs, explosions, and blood. Cool tanks, planes, frickin' Humvees. Maybe it's just the American in me, but I could go on and on. I mean, war is just so cool. Except for when it isn't. And unfortunately, that's pretty often. It's the thing we don't usually think about in war, the permanence of the decisions made during it, the people who died, the people who survived, and all those who will remember. I guess what I'm trying to say is, war. War never changes. Over the last 10 years, there's been a decline in the popularity of war films. With the oversaturated plague that has been the superhero craze, war movies don't hit like they once did. I mean, when I looked it up, I found Planet of the Apes under war movies, which, I mean, like, I guess, but okay. Gone are the days of Saving Private Ryan, Platoon, Apocalypse Now, and Full Metal Jacket. These are all films that had a significant cultural impact and are all constantly referenced all over the internet. Yet now, in today's age, we lack that. Yeah, sure, there is still war movies, and there will always be war movies, but besides the film 1917, how many modern war flicks are really doing something interesting with the formula? The answer? Not many. This brings me to an underrated gem from 2011, a film titled The Flowers of War, directed by famous Chinese filmmaker Zhang Yimou, and loosely based on the diary of Minnie Vautrin, which, trust me, we'll talk about that later. The film is set in the Chinese city of Nanjing during the year 1937. The Flowers of War stars Bruce Wayne. Patrick Bateman. Christian Bale. There we go. Anyway, Christian Bale plays a selfish guy who finds himself trapped at the center of one of humanity's most horrific massacres. Yeah, I know, I was disappointed too when I found out it wasn't about flowers going to war. Instead, this movie gives us an intense look at the atrocities committed against the Chinese people of Nanjing by the Japanese a couple years before the beginning of World War II. The movie is gorgeously stylish, well scored, well acted, and well written. Although despite the positives, this is a film that can be difficult to sit through. Not wholly unlike other war films, it isn't what I'd call tasteless. At least for me, I found some of the shocking scenes in the movie harder to watch than other war movies. Witnessing what it may have been like to endure the darkest parts of mankind is heart-wrenching yet consistently engaging. The basic rundown is that Christian Bale plays an American mortician who heads out on a job in Nanjing to bury the head priest at a Western-run Roman cathedral. As he arrives, he runs into a group of young Chinese schoolgirls who are all attempting to escape the Japanese. At this point, the Japanese have invaded, and the city is full of chaos on the streets. Christian Bale's character and the schoolgirls end up sheltering in the cathedral and attempting to figure out what to do. Meanwhile, a group of eccentric Chinese prostitutes arrive and force themselves inside. And that's kind of the basic setup. I really don't want to give too much away, as I really believe the sensation of surprise and not knowing is one of the best parts of enjoying films. From early on, I found myself caring for the characters. The sort of stuff this movie tackles as far as what goes on in war makes the threat feel evil in a way I personally can't understand. So you end up witnessing these horrible situations, and yeah, you don't really want to see it all play out on screen. You want the scene to cut, or better yet, you want a hero to jump in and save the day, but unfortunately, that doesn't usually happen. The Flowers of War isn't a traditional war movie. I mean, there really aren't any action sequences. Well, actually, that's a lie. There is technically one or two. One specifically that is just badass. There's no other way for me to describe it, but for the most part, this isn't like any of the other war movies out there. It's almost more like one of those disaster movies where something horrible happens and it follows the preceding rescuing of that character. The difference here is disaster flicks usually have a happy ending and are simply against nature, while this movie is man versus man. People die in this movie. Not everyone makes it out alive. In that sense, it's more like a horror movie. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. Like the horrors of war. Anyway, it is probably best now to discuss the existential controversies within the movie. So I'll say at this point, if you are interested in this film, give it a watch. It's a damn fine flick. So this film was made on a budget of $94 million, which is chump change compared to movies nowadays, but that's not the controversial part. But I do think that connects back to something we'll discuss. So if you look this film up online, you'll find some unusual ratings. Some people do love this movie, but there are some people criticizing its use of violence and sexual content. You'll also find some people calling it Chinese propaganda and saying how it villainizes the Japanese. So I'll try to tackle some of this stuff, starting with the violence and the sexual content. To be honest, I don't exactly know what to say about that. I didn't feel like the movie was exploitative. I felt it was probably realistically accurate. I mean, war is bloody and violent, and as for the sexual stuff, I can make a whole other video on the nature of sexual violence and its representation on film. How exactly do you portray certain acts without being grotesque? Well, you don't fantasize about the scene, you don't let the audience find gratification in the scene, and I think this film does a good job of depicting it as respectfully as you can. But on that aspect, don't take my word on it. I'm not Chinese, and I just watched this movie. I haven't really gone to a full class about the events of this part of history. Now, with the claims of this movie being Chinese propaganda, I mean, I don't know, man. You watch this movie and tell me if you think it's Chinese propaganda. I mean, the film isn't really a criticism of politics or an encouragement of the way the Chinese all do things. It's pretty plainly a story about victims during an undeniably horrible time. Does it lean one way or another? Of course it does. Every film leans in some way. But at the end of the day, it only matters whether you personally connect to it. As for villainizing the Japanese, I mean, have you looked up some of the nasty stuff the Japanese did during World War II? It is straight up nasty, and for those who don't believe me, look up the 10,000 Corpse Ditch, or Unit 731. Read about some of that stuff and try telling me the Japanese weren't the villains during that time period. Okay, breathe. So earlier I mentioned how this film is loosely based on the diary of Minnie Vautrin. So after doing some research, I discovered this movie is based on the decisions of Minnie Vautrin, who was an American woman, missionary, educator, and president of the Jinling College. Basically, this movie gender swaps her role with the character Christian Bale plays. In real life, apparently, it was an American woman who did these things, not an American man. This is crazy to think about because in today's society, modern Hollywood would never let that happen. Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. I'm all for accurate historical representation, but at the end of the day, if a film is good, I won't hold historical accuracy against it. Take Titanic, for example, a film based on a real event, but heavily dramatized for effect. So much of what happens in Titanic is played out just to make an entertaining movie, and it's in the film's benefit. I mean, Titanic is considered to be an award-winning classic. Now, back to Flowers of War. If you were making this film about the real event, I don't think it would have the same mass appeal. And when you're making a movie with a budget of 94 million US dollars, you're going to cast a big actor who appeals to everyone. So despite the change in what it was based on, I think this point still comes across. Now, if you were to ask me if they should have had a female actress or Christian Bale, as much as I love Christian Bale, I would have to say they probably should have stayed accurate. Unfortunately, that's not what happened, and we still ended up with a decent product by the end. So I won't judge the movie by what it could be. I'm only judging it by what it is. And that is an intense, bleak look at a time of war and potential hope. Anyway, I don't really think there's any more for me to say. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. I'm sure I butchered a lot of these names. I just really felt like I needed to talk about this movie. If this video made you at all interested in the movie, please check it out. And yeah, see you on the next one.